The loneliest hearts are often the ones destiny climbs the highest mountains to find. For 12 winters, the people of Grey Hollow spoke about the woman above the clouds as though she were part of the mountain itself. They called her the Mountain Witch, the Silent Ghost, the rejected Omega who had vanished before anyone could remember the color of her smile. Children dared one another to hike the old cedar trail until they reached the weathered sign that warned travelers to turn back, but no one ever ventured farther. The stories always chased them home first. Some claimed wolves guarded her cabin. Others whispered that the wind answered whenever she spoke. A few insisted the mountain had swallowed her long ago, leaving only a lonely spirit to wander through the pines. None of them knew the truth. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and every sunrise she stepped onto the small wooden porch of her cabin with a steaming mug of herbal tea warming her hands while the morning mist rolled gently across the valley below. She watched golden light spill over endless forests, listened to birds greet another peaceful day, and thanked the quiet for never asking who had broken her heart. Years earlier, another life had existed beyond those mountains, one filled with crowded pack gatherings, hopeful dreams, and promises whispered beneath a silver moon. That life ended the night her own pack rejected her, not because she had failed them, but because fear had always been louder than kindness. She never looked back after climbing the mountain with little more than a worn backpack, a blanket, and seeds she hoped would grow. They did. So did she. Seasons passed until the lonely cabin became a home stitched together with patience instead of pride. Wildflowers surrounded the porch every spring. Herbs dried beneath the windows. A narrow garden fed her through the summers, while jars of preserves lined handmade shelves before every snowfall. The forest gave generously to anyone willing to respect it, and Evelyn had never taken more than she needed. The only visitors she welcomed arrived without knocking. A red fox with one cloudy eye slept beneath her porch whenever storms rolled in. A family of rabbits nibbled carrots near the fence each morning. Blue jays perched on the railing as though they expected breakfast with the sunrise. Even an aging gray wolf appeared from time to time, carrying the calm confidence of an old guardian. Evelyn never tried to tame them. She simply shared the mountain. That morning, however, something felt different. The birds stopped singing all at once. The old wolf lifted his head from the shade and stared toward the winding trail below. The breeze shifted, carrying a scent unfamiliar to the forest, crisp as winter pine, powerful enough to silence every living creature nearby. Evelyn slowly lowered her mug. Far beneath the cliffs, beyond layers of drifting fog, she spotted movement where no traveler had walked in years. Tiny figures climbed the mountain in perfect formation, their polished armor catching flashes of morning sunlight like scattered stars. At their center walked a man so impossibly tall that even from nearly half a mile away he seemed to rise above everyone around him. The mountain had hidden Evelyn Carter from the world for 12 long years. Somehow, the world had finally found her. The procession climbed the final stretch of the narrow trail with remarkable discipline, their heavy cloaks moving gently in the mountain breeze, while polished silver emblems caught the afternoon sunlight between towering pine trees. There were no shouted commands, no restless movements, only the steady rhythm of determined footsteps echoing across ancient stone. Evelyn remained on her porch, one hand resting lightly against the weathered wooden railing as she watched strangers approach the home no outsider had visited in over a decade. The old gray wolf quietly stepped beside her, his amber eyes fixed on the trail below. Instead of growling, he simply waited, as though recognizing something beyond ordinary understanding. The enormous man leading the procession finally emerged from the forest. He was taller than anyone Evelyn had ever seen, standing well over 7 feet with broad shoulders that seemed almost too large for the narrow mountain path. His dark coat brushed against polished leather boots dusted with fresh snow, while silver clasps shaped like wolves held a heavy cloak across his back. Despite his commanding presence, he moved with surprising care, avoiding fragile wildflowers growing beside the trail as if every living thing deserved respect. His hair, dark as midnight, stirred gently in the breeze, and his pale gray eyes quietly surveyed the peaceful clearing before settling on the woman standing beside the cabin. For several silent seconds, neither of them spoke. The royal guards instinctively stopped several yards behind their king, allowing the silence to linger undisturbed. It was not fear that held them back. It was reverence for the strange calm that surrounded the mountain home. Tiny blue birds continued hopping across the porch rail. A squirrel darted across a nearby branch without alarm. Even the wind seemed to soften, as though the forest itself had accepted this meeting long before either soul realized it would happen. Finally, the giant inclined his head with unexpected humility. "Miss Evelyn Carter?" His voice was deep, steady, and carried none of the sharp authority she remembered from pack leaders years ago. Evelyn answered without stepping forward. "You climbed a very long way just to ask a question you already knew the answer to." A faint smile almost reached his eyes before disappearing again. "I am Cale Thornridge." She did not react to the name. Years earlier it would have meant everything. Now it meant no more than another traveler passing through unfamiliar woods. "I know who you are," she replied calmly. "The mountain hears many stories carried by the wind." One of the younger guards looked genuinely surprised that anyone would answer the Alpha King with such quiet confidence, but Cale simply nodded. "Then perhaps you also know why I have come." Evelyn glanced toward the valley stretching endlessly beneath drifting clouds before returning her gaze to him. "No, kings rarely climb mountains for simple conversations." Cale drew a slow breath, as though choosing every word with care. "I have searched across every territory for someone who lives without fear, without greed, and without asking the world to remember her name." Evelyn folded her arms against the cool breeze. "You have found someone who wishes only to be left alone." For the first time since beginning the climb, uncertainty crossed the Alpha King's face. The legends had prepared him for a mysterious healer, perhaps even a gifted recluse. They had not prepared him for a woman whose quiet strength made even a king feel like an unwelcome guest. Before either could speak again, the old gray wolf calmly walked past Evelyn and stopped directly before Cale. Every royal guard instinctively reached toward their weapons before Cale slowly lifted one hand, silently asking them to stand down. The wolf looked into the Alpha King's eyes for a long moment before lowering his head and peacefully stepping aside, as though granting permission that no human authority could ever give. The silence lingered after the old wolf stepped aside, broken only by the soft rustle of pine branches swaying overhead. Evelyn understood the gesture better than anyone standing in the clearing. The aging guardian had accepted the stranger's presence, but acceptance was not trust. There was a difference the mountain had taught her years ago. She stepped down from the porch, crossed the small stone path, and stopped a few feet from Cale, close enough to see faint lines of exhaustion beneath his steady gray eyes, close enough to notice that despite his enormous frame, he carried himself like a man who had been carrying something far heavier than armor. "You did not climb all this way to admire the view," she said quietly. "Say what you came to say." Cale nodded once. "I need your help." The words surprised every guard standing behind him. Kings did not ask. They commanded. Yet there was no pride in his voice, only honesty. Evelyn studied him for another long moment before answering. "No." The single word landed as gently as falling snow, yet it carried the certainty of solid stone. One of the younger guards shifted uneasily, clearly expecting his king to insist, but Cale remained perfectly still. "You have not heard my reason." Evelyn looked toward the valley where sunlight painted golden ribbons across endless forests. "The reason does not change the answer." Cale drew a slow breath. "Something is happening across the northern territories. Forests that stood healthy for centuries are growing strangely quiet. Springs that never ran dry have begun to disappear. Even the oldest healers cannot explain it. Every path has led me here." Evelyn lowered her eyes to the small herb garden beside her cabin. Lavender, sage, mint, and wild chamomile swayed peacefully in the breeze. "Nature heals in its own time. Kings simply do not like waiting." "This is different," Cale replied softly. "Animals are leaving entire valleys. Ancient wolves refuse to cross certain lands. It is as though the mountains themselves are trying to tell us something we no longer understand." His words caused the old gray wolf to lift his head once again. Evelyn noticed the movement, but her expression remained calm. "Then perhaps you should listen to the mountains instead of searching for people to solve your problems." Cale allowed a faint smile. "That is exactly what I am trying to do." For the first time since they met, Evelyn hesitated. His answer carried no arrogance, only quiet conviction. It reminded her of someone she had once hoped pack leaders could become before disappointment taught her otherwise. She quickly pushed the thought away. Hope was a dangerous thing. I stopped belonging to the world 12 years ago, she said. Whatever troubles your kingdom are no longer mine. Kale looked around the peaceful clearing. Blue birds perched fearlessly on the fence. The fox rested beneath the porch. Gentle mountain air carried the scent of cedar and fresh herbs. You say you left the world, he answered. But the world still breathes because people like you protect places like this. Evelyn shook her head. You give me far too much credit. No, Kale said quietly. I believe everyone else gave you far too little. The words settled into the silence between them. They were not spoken to persuade her. They sounded like something he had realized only after climbing every mile of the mountain. Evelyn felt an unfamiliar ache deep inside her chest, not because she believed him, but because no one had spoken to her with such simple respect in longer than she could. Remember, she took one slow step backward toward her cabin and rested a hand on the weathered door. Your journey ends here, Your Majesty. I hope you find what you are searching for, but you will not find it with me. Without waiting for his reply, she gently closed the cabin door, leaving Kale standing quietly beneath the whispering pines as the first distant rumble of approaching thunder rolled across the mountaintops. The cabin remained quiet after the wooden door closed, but silence outside quickly gave way to the growing voice of the mountain. The wind strengthened, sweeping through the towering pines with a low, steady hum that every creature living above the clouds understood. The blue jays disappeared into thicker branches. The rabbits slipped beneath tangled roots. Even the old gray wolf stood and turned toward the western ridge, ears raised toward the darkening sky. Inside, Evelyn carefully placed another log into the stone fireplace before glancing through the small window. Thick gray clouds rolled over the distant peaks far faster than they should have. She had lived on the mountain long enough to recognize the warning. Within an hour, every trail would disappear beneath heavy snowfall. Outside, one of the royal guards stepped closer to Kale. Your Majesty, we should begin the descent before the storm reaches us. Kale looked toward the winding trail that had taken nearly an entire day to climb. Snowflakes had already begun drifting across the highest ridge. We would never make it before nightfall, another guard admitted. The lower bridge will freeze. Kale remained silent for a moment before turning back toward the small cabin. He had crossed countless battlefields, negotiated with rival packs, and commanded entire armies. Yet somehow asking one quiet woman for shelter seemed the most difficult request of all. Before he could decide, the cabin door slowly opened again. Evelyn stood beneath the porch roof, now holding a small lantern whose warm light softened the gathering darkness. She looked first at the sky, then at the exhausted horses, and finally at the men whose confident expressions had quietly faded beneath the approaching storm. The mountain has already made the decision for you, she said. No one is leaving tonight. The younger guards exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to accept kindness from someone their kingdom had long forgotten. Kale stepped forward with a respectful nod. We will not impose. Evelyn looked at the swirling snow now covering the first stones of the trail. You are already here. Refusing shelter would not make either of us wiser. A faint smile touched Kale's face. Then you have my gratitude. She pointed toward a weathered barn beside the cabin. Your horses will be warmer inside. There is fresh hay in the loft. Without another word, several guards hurried to lead the animals under cover before the snowfall became too heavy. Others quickly gathered firewood stacked neatly beneath the porch, replacing every bundle they carried with dry logs from their own supplies without being asked. Evelyn noticed the gesture, but said nothing. Respect often revealed itself in the smallest actions. By the time darkness settled across the mountain, snow covered nearly every path leading away from the cabin. Inside, the single room glowed with soft firelight reflecting across polished wooden walls built by Evelyn's own hands over many patient summers. A cast iron kettle gently simmered above the fire while the comforting scent of vegetable stew filled the room. The royal guard sat quietly near the entrance, speaking only in whispers as though afraid loud voices might disturb the peace surrounding the home. Kale remained standing until Evelyn placed another wooden bowl on the table. There are enough seats, she said simply. Kings are not required to stand while soup grows cold. For the first time that day, genuine warmth reached his eyes. He removed his heavy cloak, carefully folding it over the back of a chair before sitting across from her. Between them rested nothing more complicated than fresh bread, steaming stew, and the quiet understanding that for one winter night, titles mattered far less than kindness shared beneath a small mountain roof. Morning arrived quietly beneath a blanket of fresh snow that transformed the mountain into a world of silver and light. Sunbeams filtered through frost-covered pine branches, filling the clearing with a peaceful glow that made the previous evening's storm feel like a distant memory. Evelyn had already been awake for hours. By the time the first royal guard stepped outside, she was carrying a woven basket along a narrow path disappearing into the trees, the old gray wolf following several steps behind like a silent companion. Cale watched from the porch for only a moment before setting down his empty mug and quietly following at a respectful distance. He did not announce himself, nor did Evelyn ask him to leave. They walked through untouched snow until they reached a small clearing where a young deer stood beside a fallen cedar. One of its front legs was caught beneath a broken branch. The frightened animal struggled only briefly before freezing as Evelyn slowly knelt several feet away. She spoke so softly that Cale could not hear the words, yet the trembling creature gradually relaxed. The old wolf remained perfectly still, almost as though he understood this gentle ritual. Evelyn carefully lifted the branch without sudden movement, then examined the deer's injured leg. From her basket she removed clean linen, crushed herbs, and a small glass bottle filled with amber-colored oil. Her hands moved with calm confidence born from years of quiet practice. The frightened animal never attempted to flee. It simply watched her with trusting eyes while she wrapped the injured leg with patient care. After several gentle moments, the deer cautiously stood, tested its weight, and disappeared into the forest with surprising ease. Evelyn smiled almost imperceptibly before gathering her supplies. "You never expected anything in return," Cale said quietly from behind her. She turned, neither startled nor embarrassed to have been observed. Kindness becomes smaller the moment it expects payment. Those simple words lingered in Cale's thoughts as they continued walking. Throughout the morning, he witnessed things no report from his advisors had ever mentioned. Evelyn stopped beside frozen shrubs to scatter grain for winter birds. She carefully repaired a damaged wooden nesting box fastened high against an old maple tree. She collected fallen branches from a narrow stream so melting snow could continue flowing freely downhill toward villages hidden beyond the valley. Every small act seemed insignificant by itself, yet together they revealed someone quietly protecting an entire mountainside without expecting anyone to notice. As they returned toward the cabin, distant voices drifted upward from the lower trail. Two elderly villagers struggled through knee-deep snow while pulling a small sled loaded with empty baskets. The moment Evelyn recognized them, she hurried forward without hesitation. "You should not have climbed after such a storm," she said warmly. The older woman smiled with genuine affection. "We knew you would have medicine ready before anyone asked." Evelyn opened the cabin door and soon returned carrying neatly labeled jars filled with dried herbs, tea blends, and healing salves. The elderly man tried placing several silver coins into her hand, but she gently folded his fingers back around them. "Use this to buy blankets before the next storm," she said. "That will help far more than paying me." Tears quietly filled the woman's eyes. "You have kept our little village healthy for years, Evelyn. We could never repay you." They departed with grateful smiles, never noticing the silent king standing beneath the porch roof. Cale watched until the sled disappeared among the snow-covered pines before turning toward the woman who believed the world had forgotten her. In that quiet mountain morning, he finally understood why every trail had led him here. She possessed no throne, wore no crown, and commanded no army. Yet through simple acts of compassion, she had earned something far rarer than power. She had earned the complete trust of every life fortunate enough to cross her path. That afternoon the sky cleared completely, revealing endless ridges stretching beyond the horizon beneath brilliant winter sunlight. The royal guard spent the day repairing a section of the mountain trail that had been buried beneath fallen branches, while Evelyn quietly gathered fresh herbs from places only she seemed to know. Cale wandered no farther than the edge of the clearing, respecting both her space and the unspoken rhythm of life she had built. As the sun drifted lower, Evelyn returned carrying a bundle of evergreen branches and paused beside an ancient stone marker half hidden beneath thick moss. She gently brushed away the fresh snow covering its weathered surface before placing a single white mountain flower at its base. Kale approached slowly, careful not to interrupt what appeared to be a familiar tradition. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone long before the oldest kingdoms existed. They resembled flowing vines surrounding a crescent moon unlike any crest used by modern packs. "Someone important rests here," Kale said quietly. Evelyn kept her eyes on the stone. "No one is buried beneath it." He looked at her with silent curiosity. "Then why do you return?" She smiled faintly. "Because some places remember even when people forget." The answer lingered in the crisp mountain air. Kale knelt beside the marker, running his fingers lightly across the ancient carvings. His expression slowly changed as recognition flickered behind his calm gray eyes. During his childhood, the royal archives had contained faded sketches almost identical to these forgotten symbols, copied from books so old that most historians dismissed them as legends. They belonged to the first Luna, the woman ancient stories claimed had united wolves not through strength, but through compassion. Every record after that disappeared into mystery. Kale looked up toward the mountain towering above them. "These markings should not exist here." Evelyn gently shrugged. "They have always been here. Has no one ever asked about them?" She laughed softly, though there was sadness hidden beneath the sound. "People stopped climbing this mountain long before they stopped believing my life mattered." Her words settled heavily between them. Kale remembered every report describing the Northern Territories, every advisor insisting this mountain held no strategic value, every official map labeling the summit as abandoned wilderness. Yet standing there, he could feel something impossible to explain. The forest seemed unusually alive, every breeze carrying a quiet harmony that disappeared the moment they stepped farther from the stone. The old gray wolf approached and calmly rested beside the marker. Moments later, several blue birds landed above them while a pair of deer emerged silently from the trees without fear. It was as though every path on the mountain naturally curved toward this forgotten place. Kale slowly stood. "The disturbances across my kingdom began less than 2 years ago." Evelyn nodded without surprise. "That was when the oldest spring near the eastern ridge stopped flowing." He stared at her. "You knew?" "The mountain tells anyone willing to listen." She looked toward the distant peaks glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Streams change their songs. Trees bloom later. Birds alter their migrations. Nature speaks every day. People simply stopped paying attention. Kale felt an unexpected weight settle inside him. He had spent months consulting scholars, generals, and healers while searching for complicated answers. Meanwhile, the woman everyone had dismissed had quietly watched every change unfold one season at a time. "Why did you never come to the capital?" he asked. Evelyn lowered her eyes before answering. "Because the last time I stood before a gathering of wolves, they decided my voice was worth less than their silence." Kale found himself unable to answer. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he realized that perhaps the kingdom's greatest loss had never been a forgotten legend hidden inside old books. It had been allowing someone like Evelyn Carter to believe the world had no place left for her. The following morning began with an unusual stillness. No birds greeted the sunrise. No breeze stirred the frost resting on the cedar branches. Even the small stream beside the cabin seemed to flow more quietly than before, as though the mountain itself had paused to listen. Evelyn stepped onto the porch carrying a bucket of grain for the birds, but instead of eager wings fluttering toward her, she found every creature staring toward the northern ridge. The old gray wolf stood perfectly motionless, his ears lifted and his golden eyes fixed on the distant tree line. Kale noticed the change immediately as he emerged from the barn where the royal guards had spent the night. He had learned enough during the past 2 days to trust the mountain's warnings. If every animal had fallen silent at once, something had disturbed the natural balance. Before anyone could speak, several white-tailed deer appeared from the forest at a hurried pace. They crossed the clearing without panic, yet their unusual behavior was impossible to ignore. Behind them came rabbits, foxes, and dozens of birds, all moving in the same direction as though guided by an invisible call. None of them fled from people. They simply searched for safety near Evelyn's cabin. One young guard reached for his sword before Kale quietly lowered the man's hand. "No," he said. "Look at them." The frightened creatures gathered around the clearing without fear of the humans standing there. A tiny fox curled beside Evelyn's boots. Blue jays landed across the porch railing. Even the deer remained unusually calm once they reached the open meadow surrounding her home. Evelyn slowly knelt beside the fox, gently stroking its back while watching the northern forest. "Something has entered the mountain," she whispered. "Not to hunt, to take." Kale followed her gaze, but saw only endless rows of snow-covered pines disappearing beneath the morning light. Then the sound arrived. It was faint at first, almost mistaken for distant thunder, yet it carried a strange rhythm unlike anything created by nature. The old wolf released a low warning growl, not from anger, but from deep concern. The forest answered with silence. Evelyn rose and walked toward the ancient stone marker hidden beneath fresh snow. She rested one hand against its weathered surface and quietly closed her eyes. For several long moments, she said nothing. The mountain breeze gently lifted loose strands of her chestnut hair, while every waiting animal remained perfectly still. When she finally opened her eyes, they reflected a calm certainty that made Kale's heart sink. "The oldest grove beyond the northern ridge has been damaged," she said softly. "Several guardian trees have fallen." Kale frowned. "How can you possibly know that from here?" Evelyn looked toward him. "Because I have listened to this mountain every day for 12 years. Without another word, she started walking toward the narrow trail leading north. Kale matched her pace almost immediately. "You are not going alone." She did not argue. Somehow she already knew he would follow. The royal guards prepared to accompany them, but Evelyn gently shook her head. "Too many footsteps will frighten what remains." Kale understood. He instructed his men to stay behind and continue protecting the cabin until they returned. Together they crossed untouched snow beneath towering evergreens while the old gray wolf quietly led the way. As they climbed higher, signs of change became impossible to ignore. Branches that should have been heavy with winter birds stood strangely empty. Fresh animal tracks all pointed downhill. Even the familiar scent of pine carried an unfamiliar heaviness. They reached the northern grove just as sunlight broke through the clouds. Several enormous cedar trees that had stood for centuries now rested across the forest floor. Their roots exposed after the earth beneath them had unexpectedly given way. There were no signs of deliberate destruction. Only the unsettling feeling that something ancient within the mountain had quietly begun to awaken after a very long sleep. The great cedars rested in silence beneath the winter sky, their fallen trunks stretching across the snow like forgotten bridges between another age and the present. Evelyn walked among them slowly, her fingertips brushing the rough bark of the oldest tree with quiet reverence. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment neither she nor Kale spoke. The forest seemed to hold its breath beside her. Then, almost imperceptibly, a gentle breeze drifted through the grove. It was the first living wind they had felt since arriving. Snowflakes lifted into the air instead of falling, circling around the ancient clearing in graceful patterns. Kale watched in silent wonder as birds that had hidden throughout the morning gradually returned to the nearby branches. The old gray wolf stepped forward until he stood beside Evelyn, lowering his head as though greeting an old friend, rather than a master. She slowly opened her eyes, and a softness settled across her face unlike anything Kale had seen before. "The mountain is not angry," she whispered. "It is grieving." Kale looked around the grove. Grieving for what? Evelyn rested one hand against the weathered trunk. "For being forgotten." The words echoed through his thoughts. Every kingdom celebrated castles, armies, and victories. Yet few remembered the forests that had sheltered generations long before crowns existed. He suddenly understood why every answer had escaped his scholars. They had searched libraries while the truth waited patiently beneath the trees. As sunlight broke through the clouds, it illuminated the ancient symbols carved deep into the exposed roots of the oldest cedar. Kale stepped closer, recognizing the same crescent patterns he had seen on the forgotten stone near Evelyn's cabin. They were everywhere, hidden beneath moss and thyme, quietly connecting the entire mountainside. "This was never simply a forest," he said. Evelyn nodded gently. "It was a sanctuary." Before either of them spoke again, the snow around the great cedar shimmered with warm golden light. It was neither blinding nor frightening. Instead, it felt peaceful, like the first sunrise after a long winter. The breeze carried the scent of fresh pine and wildflowers despite the snow covering the ground. Every bird began singing at once. The deer emerged from between the trees without fear. Even the branches overhead seemed to sway in perfect harmony. Cale instinctively lowered his head, overcome by a feeling he could not explain. It was not power pressing against him. It was peace. Evelyn remained perfectly still as the golden light slowly surrounded her before fading into the forest once again. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet everything somehow felt different. The mountain no longer seemed silent. It felt alive. Cale turned toward her with quiet certainty. The stories were wrong. She smiled faintly. Most stories are. He slowly stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he removed the silver crest fastened to his cloak and placed it gently upon the snow between them, setting aside every symbol of rank he carried. Then the tallest ruler in the Northern Territories lowered himself onto one knee, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect did. Evelyn's eyes widened in quiet surprise. The old gray wolf sat calmly beside them, watching without fear. "I did not climb this mountain to claim you," Cale said softly. "I came searching for someone who could save my kingdom. Instead, I found someone who reminded me what a kingdom is supposed to protect." The mountain breeze stirred once more, carrying birdsong across the clearing. Cale lifted his eyes to meet hers. "If you ever choose to leave this mountain, you will walk beside me, never behind me. If you choose to remain here, I will still honor what you have built. The decision will always be yours." Evelyn felt warmth rise within her chest, not because of destiny spoken by ancient legends, but because after 12 years of being dismissed, someone had finally offered her something no one else ever had. A choice. For a long time, neither of them moved. Snowflakes drifted lazily through shafts of golden light, while the ancient grove seemed to settle into a peaceful silence that no words could improve. Evelyn looked at the silver crest resting on the snow between them before meeting Cale's patient gray eyes once more. She had spent 12 years believing that every choice had already been taken from her on the day she was rejected. Yet here stood the most powerful man in the Northern Territories, asking for nothing she was unwilling to give. She slowly offered him her hand. "I will not become someone different simply because others finally see my worth," she said gently. "Then do not change," Cale replied as he rose to his feet. "Help us remember how to become better instead." A quiet smile finally reached Evelyn's eyes. It was small, almost hesitant, but it carried more warmth than the spring sunlight melting the snow around them. Together they walked back toward the cabin while the forest gradually returned to life. Birds filled the air with cheerful songs. Deer wandered peacefully through the trees. The old gray wolf trotted ahead as though leading them home. When they reached the clearing, the royal guards immediately noticed something had changed. Their king no longer walked alone, yet neither did he lead. He matched Evelyn's pace exactly, allowing her to choose every step along the familiar trail. Days later, when the mountain roads became safe again, Cale prepared to return to the capital. Before leaving, he stood beside the porch where their first conversation had begun. "The kingdom will always welcome you," he said. Evelyn looked across the valley sparkling beneath the morning sun. "Then the kingdom should also learn to welcome these mountains." Cale smiled. "It will." True to his word, the first change came before winter ended. Rather than ordering lumber to build another fortress on the summit, Cale commissioned skilled builders to create a modest sanctuary at the base of the mountain where travelers, healers, and families could rest without disturbing the ancient forest above. Every structure was designed around existing trees instead of replacing them. New trails followed the natural landscape rather than forcing it to change. Villagers from across the Northern Territories visited not to conquer the mountain, but to learn from it. Evelyn never abandoned her cabin. It remained exactly where it had always stood, surrounded by wildflowers, herbs, and quiet mornings shared with the creatures who had become her family long before the world remembered her name. Some weeks, she descended to teach young healers how to recognize the language of rivers, forests, and changing seasons. Other weeks, Cale climbed the familiar trail carrying little more than fresh bread, warm tea, and stories from the kingdom below. The people soon noticed that their Alpha King returned from every visit calmer than when he had left. He listened more carefully during council meetings. He protected forests with the same determination once reserved for castles. He reminded every pack leader that strength without compassion could never create lasting peace. As for Evelyn, she no longer measured her life by the voices that had rejected her years before. She measured it by every healthy stream that continued flowing, every child who learned to respect the mountain, every wounded animal that found safety, and every sunrise that painted the valley with quiet hope. In time, the old stories disappeared, replaced by new ones told around warm fireplaces on winter evenings. They no longer spoke of a lonely woman hiding above the clouds. They spoke of the gentle guardian who reminded a king that true greatness was never measured by the height of a throne, but by the kindness shown to those with no power at all. And whenever travelers looked toward the mountain, they would often see two small figures standing together on the cabin porch as the morning light spread across the endless forest below, proving that sometimes destiny does not rescue a broken heart by taking it somewhere new. Sometimes it simply sends the right person willing to climb all the way home.